Racist customer insults black waitress. Then she reveals she's a restaurant owner. With-respect had nothing to do with titles or skin color, but everything to do with the character we carry in our hearts. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Magnolia Bistro, casting golden streaks across empty tables that would soon fill with the breakfast crowd. Sarah Williams, 34 years old with kind eyes and callous hands that spoke of years spent serving others, moved gracefully between tables, adjusting napkins and checking salt shakers. She'd been doing this dance for what felt like forever, though few customers ever really saw her, really looked at the woman behind the uniform. Today would be different. Today, a single encounter would test everything she'd built, everything she believed about dignity and grace under pressure. The brass bell above the door chimed softly as the first customer of the day stepped inside, bringing with him assumptions that would shatter like china on a marble floor. "Where are you watching from today?" Sarah had purchased Magnolia Bistro 3 years ago, but she kept working the floor because she loved the connection with people. Her staff knew, of course, but regular customers saw only what they expected to see: a black waitress in a starched apron. She'd grown up in this neighborhood, watching her grandmother clean houses for families who barely acknowledged her presence. "Dignity isn't given, baby girl," Grandma Rose used to say. "It's something you carry yourself." The morning rush began with familiar faces. Mr. Henderson ordering his usual coffee black, Mrs. Patterson requesting extra butter for her biscuits. Sarah moved between them with practiced ease, remembering preferences, asking about grandchildren, making each person feel seen. This was why she bought the place, why she worked 16-hour days to keep it running. Food brought people together, or at least it should. Then he walked in, a man in his 50s, expensive suit wrinkled from travel, briefcase clutched tight like armor. His eyes swept the dining room with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to being served, to being important. He chose a corner table, spreading papers across its surface before Sarah could even approach with a menu. "I'll have coffee black and make it quick," he said without looking up. "I've got calls to make." His voice carried the sharp edge of someone whose patience had already worn thin, though the day had barely begun. Sarah smiled warmly, setting down the menu and water glass. "Of course, sir. Our breakfast special today includes fresh buttermilk pancakes with—" "Did I ask about specials?" he interrupted, finally raising his eyes. What she saw there made her stomach tighten. It wasn't just impatience. It was something colder, more familiar, something she'd hoped never to encounter in her own establishment. The coffee pot felt suddenly heavy in her hands as she realized this wouldn't be just another Tuesday morning. This would be a test of everything Grandma Rose had taught her about carrying dignity, even when others tried to strip it away. The coffee cup rattled slightly against its saucer as Sarah set it down, her hand steady despite the growing tension. The man barely glanced at her, already barking into his phone about market projections and quarterly losses. Other diners began to notice the sharp edge in his voice, conversations quieting as heads turned. "Excuse me," he said, snapping his fingers to get Sarah's attention while still holding the phone. "This coffee's cold, and I asked for cream." Sarah felt heat rise in her chest, but her voice remained calm. "I'll get you a fresh cup right away, sir. The cream is right there on your table." He looked at the small ceramic pitcher she'd placed beside his cup, then back at her with unconcealed irritation. "I don't serve myself. That's what people like you are for, isn't it?" The words hit the dining room like a slap. Conversation stopped entirely. Mrs. Patterson's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Mr. Henderson's newspaper crinkled as his grip tightened. Sarah's grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time, baby girl. But never let them make you smaller." She poured cream into his cup with steady hands, watching it swirl like storm clouds. "Is there anything else I can get you, sir?" "Look," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that made her skin crawl. "I don't have time for attitude from help. I'm here on business, important business, and I expect proper service. Not whatever this is." He gestured dismissively at her, and Sarah felt every eye in the restaurant watching, waiting to see how she'd respond. The morning light seemed to dim as ugly truth settled over the room like fog. This wasn't about cold coffee or cream. This was about power, about putting someone in what he considered their place. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she set down the cream pitcher, and she knew that everyone present would remember this moment. The question was, how would they remember her response? If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. I understand you're having a difficult morning, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 3 generations of women who'd faced worse and survived with grace and tact. But I need to ask you to treat everyone in this restaurant with respect. The man's face darkened, his phone call forgotten. Respect? You want to lecture me about respect? His voice rose, causing silverware to pause mid-bite at nearby tables. I make more in a month than you'll see in a year, sweetheart. I don't need lessons from someone whose biggest achievement is remembering coffee orders. The words sliced through morning warmth like winter wind. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, not break, but shift like tectonic plates finding new alignment. Mrs. Patterson stood up slowly, her chair scraping against hardwood. Young man, she said in the voice she'd once used to discipline 3 sons, you're speaking to a fine woman who served this community with nothing but kindness. Other customers nodded, murmurs of agreement rippling through the room. Mr. Henderson folded his newspaper with military precision. Some people, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, mistake a uniform for a person's worth. The man laughed, but it sounded hollow in the face of rising disapproval. Oh, this is rich. Now the locals are getting involved. Listen, lady, he said, pointing a manicured finger at Sarah. I've eaten in restaurants from New York to Los Angeles. I know quality service when I see it, and this ain't it. Maybe if your people learn their place. Stop. Sarah's voice cut through his rant like a bell through fog. She reached into her apron pocket, fingers closing around the small leather folder she carried every day. Her business license. Her deed. The dining room held its breath as Sarah unfolded the papers, her movements deliberate and calm. This was the moment Grandma Rose had prepared her for without knowing it, the moment when dignity met revelation, when assumptions crumbled like old plaster. The morning light seemed to intensify, illuminating truth in ways that words alone never could. Have you ever faced something like this? Share your experience in the comments. Sarah smoothed the business license on the table between them, its official seal catching the morning light. My name is Sarah Williams, she said, her voice carrying new authority, and I'm the owner of Magnolia Bistro. This is my restaurant. The silence that followed was so complete that the tick of the old wall clock sounded like thunder. The man's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a pale recognition of his catastrophic mistake. His expensive briefcase suddenly seemed like a child's toy. His important phone calls reduced to background noise. That's not possible, he stammered, but the legal documents told a different story. Sarah's photograph smiled back on the license, professional and proud. I bought this place 3 years ago, Sarah continued, her voice steady as bedrock. I work the floor because I love serving people, because I believe food brings us together across all the lines we draw between ourselves. But what you've shown me today isn't who I want to serve. Around the dining room, heads nodded in approval. Mrs. Patterson dabbed her eyes with her napkin. Mr. Henderson's weathered face creased into something between a smile and amazement. I had no idea, the man said, his voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I've had a rough week, business pressures, you understand? But Sarah was already shaking her head. Understanding doesn't excuse cruelty, sir. And success doesn't give anyone the right to diminish another person's humanity. She folded the documents carefully, returning them to her apron pocket like armor being put away after battle. I'm going to ask you to finish your coffee and leave. Not because I'm vindictive, but because everyone in this room deserves to eat their breakfast in peace. The man started to protest, then seemed to realize the futility. Every face in the restaurant was watching him, and not with sympathy. He threw a $20 bill on the table, far more than the coffee cost, and gathered his papers with shaking hands. This won't be the end of this, he muttered, but the threat felt empty, deflated. As he reached the door, Sarah called after him. It doesn't have to be the beginning of anything ugly either. We all get chances to be better. If you've been moved by this journey, subscribe for more heartfelt stories. The brass bell chimed softly as the door closed behind him, and for a moment, the restaurant remained perfectly still. Then Mrs. Patterson began to clap, slowly at first, then joined by Mr. Henderson, then the young couple by the window, until the entire dining room filled with applause that sounded like rain on a tin roof, warm and healing. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude for a community that stood with her, for customers who become family, for a moment when truth prevailed over assumptions. "Thank you," she whispered, and somehow everyone heard. "Honey," Mrs. Patterson said, walking over to embrace her, "we should be thanking you for your grace, for your strength, for the best biscuits this side of Atlanta." Laughter bubbled through the room like a spring after winter, washing away the last traces of ugliness. Mr. Henderson raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Sarah Williams, who shows us every day that dignity isn't about what you own, but who you are." Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the chairs were stacked on tables, Sarah sat alone in her office, looking at the business license that had changed everything. She thought about her grandmother, who'd never lived to see her own dreams fulfilled, but had planted seeds that bloomed in unexpected seasons. Grandma Rose had been right. Dignity was something you carried yourself, but sometimes life gave you moments to share with others. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Patterson stood in the doorway, holding a small wrapped package. "My grandmother's recipe for sweet tea," she said, placing on Sarah's desk. "Been in our family for generations. Thought it might belong here now, with someone who understands that feeding people is about more than food." Sarah unwrapped the yellowed index card, reading the careful handwritten instructions that spoke of Sunday gatherings and front porch conversations. At the bottom, in faded ink, were the words, "Made with love, served with pride." She smiled, tucking the recipe into the same pocket that held her business documents. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that respect was a language everyone could learn to speak. Thank you for joining Sarah's journey today. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories of courage and dignity.